My name is Cassidy, and I am 28 years old. The director leaned forward in the Zoom meeting, his face filling the screen with a smirk. The corporate conference room was suffocatingly silent, the air thick with the kind of intense pressure that usually precedes a firing squad. On the massive wall display, the board of directors watched like vultures circling their prey. The director projected a grainy, zoomed-in photograph onto the shared screen. It clearly showed me sitting in a dimly lit booth at a downtown diner, shaking hands with the CEO of our biggest rival. "We have absolutely zero tolerance for corporate espionage," the director sneered through the speakers, clearly relishing the power trip. Beside me in the physical room, the head of HR didn't even blink. She slid a thick, ominous envelope across the polished mahogany table. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated," the HR manager announced, her voice robotic and devoid of any human warmth. "You are in direct violation of your contract by secretly working 2 jobs and consulting for the competition. You have exactly 5 minutes to pack up your personal belongings and vacate the premises." They expected pure panic. They expected me to beg for my severance, to cry, or to frantically deny everything. Instead, the heavy silence stretched across the room until I let out a soft, genuine laugh. I leaned back in my leather chair, locking eyes directly with the smug director on the monitor. "You're right. I will focus on one kitchen." The director's arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a confused, almost panicked scowl. The HR manager's jaw practically unhinged. They knew exactly what those words meant. They knew I held the secret recipes that kept this crumbling culinary empire afloat. Without breaking eye contact with the camera, I unclipped my corporate badge and let it drop onto the table with a sharp, final clack. I gathered my phone, stood up, and walked out without another word. Pushing through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, the cold morning air hit my face, and for the first time in 3 long years, my chest flooded with absolute, unadulterated relief. Before we get into the rest of my story, drop a comment and let me know what time it is and what city you are watching from, so I know how far my story has reached. 3 years earlier, I never imagined I would become the only person keeping an entire restaurant chain's menu alive. When I first signed my contract, the vision sold to me was grand and collaborative. Victor Hale, the charismatic director who oversaw my final interview, had walked me through a gleaming, state-of-the-art test kitchen. He promised a dedicated research and development team, a generous budget for premium ingredient sourcing, and an environment where culinary creativity could thrive without administrative bottlenecks. I was hired as a senior menu developer, intended to be one of 5 experts steering the brand's entire culinary direction. The reality, however, rapidly mutated into something entirely different. Within my first 6 months, the promised budget expansions were frozen indefinitely. Then came the endless parade of corporate buzzwords: streamlining, optimizing, and restructuring. The 5-person dream team was systematically dismantled piece by piece. 2 senior chefs took early retirement packages they simply couldn't afford to refuse. Another left for a more lucrative position at a competitor, and the junior sous chef was unceremoniously transferred to standard restaurant operations. Suddenly, the sprawling test kitchen felt terrifyingly empty. Every single signature recipe, from the highly touted artisanal sauces to the precisely calibrated baking times for the chain's famous rustic breads, fell squarely onto my shoulders. The pressure was relentless and suffocating. Corporate demands didn't shrink alongside the team size, they amplified exponentially. I found myself working brutal hours, pulling late-night shifts just to finalize complex nutritional profiles, and spending my weekends in the sterile fluorescent glow of the commercial kitchen, desperately trying to invent new seasonal items. There was no boundary between my life and the ovens. The constant mandate was to innovate, to create dishes that tasted like $1 million but cost absolute pennies to produce. I was essentially running a phantom kitchen, doing the work of an entire department while subsisting on stale coffee and pure adrenaline. This exhausting toll bled directly into my personal life, culminating in a tense, unforgettable Zoom call with my family. I had been leaning heavily on my heritage to meet the impossible corporate deadlines, adapting my grandmother's closely guarded culinary techniques for the mass market menu. Looking at the screen, my mother, Maggie, frowned deeply, her eyes scanning my pale, exhausted face. Beside her in the camera frame was my older brother, Connor, his arms crossed defensively across his chest. "You look like an absolute ghost, Cass," Connor started, his tone a harsh mixture of genuine concern and sharp accusation. "Are you even sleeping anymore? And more importantly, what is this I hear about the new winter menu featuring a rustic spiced glaze? That sounds exactly like Nana's holiday reduction." I rubbed my temples, a dull, throbbing ache threatening to break through into a full migraine. "It's an adaptation, Connor. I had to deliver 3 new premium entrees by Tuesday morning. I didn't have the time to build entirely new flavor profiles from scratch." Maggie leaned closer to her webcam, her voice sharp with protective disappointment. "Those recipes belong to our family. They are our history, not some mass-produced commodity for a board of directors who don't even know how to properly pronounce the ingredients. You are giving away our soul to meet a soulless corporate quota." "I am surviving, Mum," I shot back, the sheer exhaustion finally cracking my carefully maintained composure. "I am holding an entire company's menu together with duct tape and sheer willpower. I needed a shortcut, and I used what I knew. I didn't give them the exact family recipe, just the foundational technique." The call ended with a lingering, bitter silence. The heavy guilt gnawed at me, compounding the physical drain that had become my constant companion. My husband, Derek, had witnessed the entire unraveling from the hallway. Later that night, he found me sitting on the cold kitchen floor of our apartment, staring blankly at a massive stack of vendor invoices. He didn't say a word at first. He just sat down beside me on the tiles and gently pulled the papers from my trembling hands. "This has to stop," Derek said quietly, his voice laced with deep, unwavering worry. "I am watching you evaporate right in front of me. You aren't just working a job anymore, you are letting them consume you completely. They are exploiting your incredible work ethic. What happens when you finally break?" "If I stop, the entire menu fails," I whispered, the terrifying reality of the situation echoing in the quiet room. Nobody else knows the complex supply chain substitutions. Nobody else knows the exact hydration ratios for the dough. I am the only one holding it all together. "Then they need to know that," he insisted, pulling me into a tight, grounding hug. "You have to force them to see the massive risk they are running by leaving you completely isolated." Determined to establish professional boundaries, I requested a formal, documented meeting with Victor and the upper management team. I compiled a detailed risk assessment report. Sitting in their plush, climate-controlled office, I laid it out in plain, unavoidable English. I explained the bus factor, the disastrous, immediate consequences for the entire chain if I were to suddenly leave, fall ill, or succumb to burnout. I detailed the sheer volume of proprietary operational knowledge trapped solely in my head. I requested, practically begged, for just one junior assistant to train. Victor smiled, that same polished, hollow smile he had used to charm me during my interview years ago. "Cassidy, we appreciate your unwavering dedication. We truly do. But the current fiscal quarter just doesn't allow for any headcount expansion. You are our culinary rock star. We have complete faith in your unique ability to handle this workload. Just prioritize and manage your time more effectively." They weren't listening. They were willfully, arrogantly blind to the precipice they stood on, choosing minor short-term savings over critical long-term stability. The realization hit me like a bucket of freezing water. I was entirely alone in this fight, and they genuinely didn't care about my physical or mental well-being, only my daily output. A week after that incredibly demoralizing meeting, while mindlessly scrolling through my chronically overcrowded inbox, an unexpected subject line caught my eye. It was an exclusive, highly personalized invitation to the International Culinary Innovators Conference. It was a prestigious gathering of the brightest minds in the global food industry, a place where genuine talent was nurtured and celebrated, far away from the penny-pinching spreadsheets of corporate fast casual dining. Without a second thought, I clicked accept. That conference in Miami changed everything. Stepping into the massive, sunlit atrium of the convention center felt like breathing clean oxygen after years trapped underground. The air was buzzing with genuine passion, filled with the mingled scents of artisan espresso and global spices from the demonstration halls. For 3 days, I wasn't a glorified corporate machine pushing out cost-saving shortcuts. I was a respected professional, surrounded by peers who actually understood the intricate science and deep art of culinary development. The highlight of the event for me was my scheduled seminar. I stood behind a sleek podium in a packed auditorium, delivering a deep dive presentation on scaling artisanal fermentation techniques for commercial application. I spoke about flavor integrity, maintaining structural consistency in massive batches, and the delicate balance between shelf life and authentic taste. When I finished, the applause wasn't just polite, it was enthusiastic. People lined up to ask nuanced, intelligent questions. For the first time in an eternity, my expertise was being celebrated rather than merely extracted. As the crowd slowly thinned out, a sharply dressed woman with a commanding yet approachable presence lingered near the front row. She waited patiently until the last attendee walked away before stepping up to the podium. "That was a brilliantly executed presentation," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Victoria Reyes. I head up operations and development at Fresh and Forge." I recognized the name instantly. Fresh and Forge was the rapidly ascending competitor that had been steadily eating into my company's market share. They were known for precisely the kind of vibrant, high-quality menus I was constantly being forbidden from creating. "I appreciate that, Victoria," I replied, shaking her hand, trying to mask my surprise. "Your recent launch of the seasonal Mediterranean line was incredibly impressive. The flavor profiles were remarkably bold for a fast casual model." Victoria smiled, a genuine expression of mutual professional respect. "Thank you. We prioritize quality above all else, but as we expand nationwide, we are hitting a wall. We have the vision, but scaling it without losing our core identity is proving exceptionally difficult. Watching you break down the exact mathematics of flavor retention today was a revelation. We need someone with your precise skill set." She didn't waste time dancing around the subject. Victoria immediately proposed bringing me on board as a lead developer. I had to politely decline, citing the ironclad nature of my current employment and the exhausting reality of my daily schedule. But Victoria was a master strategist. She didn't just accept a no when she saw an opportunity. "What if we bypass the kitchen entirely?" Victoria countered, her eyes lighting up with a sudden idea. "I don't need you physically standing over a stove. I have an army of talented line cooks for that. What I desperately lack is your analytical mind. What if I hired you exclusively as an external consultant? You wouldn't be an employee. You would strictly review our R&D packets, analyze our scaling ratios, and provide structural feedback. 10 hours a week, entirely remote, strictly over Zoom, and solely on the weekends. We pay a premium consulting rate, and you never have to set foot in our corporate offices." The offer was staggering. It was intellectually stimulating, financially liberating, and required zero physical labor. That evening, sitting on the balcony of my hotel room overlooking the ocean, I dialed my husband. "It sounds incredible, Cass," Derek said through the phone, his voice a mix of excitement and cautious pragmatism after I laid out the entire proposal. "But you need to be absolutely certain about the legalities. Does this cross the line with your current contract?" "I've been reading over my non-compete clause for the last hour," I explained, tracing the lines of the digital document on my tablet. It explicitly prohibits me from holding another salaried culinary production role or sharing proprietary company recipes. Victoria isn't asking for my recipes, she is asking for my mathematical formulas on scaling, which is a universal science, not a company secret. As an independent, weekend consultant reviewing external data, it technically sits in a massive grey area. "And how do you feel about operating in a grey area?" Derek asked gently. "I feel like I have given my current employer 3 years of my blood, sweat, and sanity, and they won't even hire an intern to help me," I stated firmly, the resentment crystallizing into resolve. "I need this, Derek, not just for the money, but to remember what it feels like to use my brain for something other than cutting costs." "Then do it," he affirmed without hesitation. "Protect yourself, keep it strictly remote, but take the opportunity." The transition into this double life was seamless but intense. My weekdays remained a grueling marathon of corporate demands, fluorescent lights, and the constant battle against shrinking budgets. But Saturday mornings became my sanctuary. I would brew a fresh pot of coffee, open my laptop at the dining table, and log into a secure Zoom room with Victoria and her eager, attentive R&D team. The contrast in environments was giving me absolute whiplash. At my day job, my warnings about supply chain failures were ignored. On the weekend calls, when I suggested adjusting the acidity in a tomato base to extend its commercial viability, Victoria's team took rigorous notes and implemented the change immediately. They valued my insight. They respected my time. The consulting checks that arrived discreetly in the mail were substantial, slowly building a solid financial safety net for Derek and me. But the psychological validation was the true currency I was hoarding. For 8 months, the arrangement functioned perfectly. I kept a strict firewall between the two worlds. I never used my primary work laptop for consulting, never took a call during weekday business hours, and never allowed the two menus to cross-pollinate. I was a ghost in the machine, quietly guiding Fresh and Forge's expansion from the comfort of my own living room. The system was flawless until the parameters of the project shifted. Victoria's team had been working tirelessly on a revolutionary plant-based protein texture, a project I had been heavily advising on mathematically. However, no amount of video conferencing could accurately convey mouthfeel and density. After weeks of frustrating remote adjustments, Victoria sent a private message during our Saturday review. The final prototype was ready, but it was incredibly delicate and highly temperature sensitive. It couldn't be shipped through standard overnight couriers without degrading the structural integrity I had helped design. To properly evaluate the final product before they committed to a multi-million-dollar factory run, I needed to physically taste it. Since I refused to visit their corporate headquarters to maintain my strict boundaries, Victoria suggested a compromise. She would be passing through my city the following Tuesday. She proposed a quick, discreet 20-minute meeting to hand off the insulated prototype container. We selected a dimly lit, independently owned diner downtown, a place far removed from the usual corporate lunch spots, completely unaware of the catastrophic chain of events that simple location choice would trigger. The Monday morning Zoom call came without warning. The digital calendar invite had materialized in my inbox just 10 minutes prior, cryptically titled Leadership Alignment. Walking into that freezing mahogany boardroom, the oppressive atmosphere was immediate. While the executive's accusations through the speakers and the swift robotic termination were a massive shock to the system, the true grueling ordeal began the second I stepped out of that room. A stern, broad-shouldered security contractor fell into step right behind me, his heavy tactical boots echoing loudly against the tiled hallway as he escorted me back down to the subterranean test kitchen to collect my entire professional life. For 3 agonizing years, that windowless, stainless steel cavern had been my entire universe. Now, under the unblinking, highly suspicious gaze of the guard, I was given exactly 5 minutes to dismantle it. I systematically opened my metal locker, pulling out the custom-forged Japanese chef knives Derek had gifted me for our wedding anniversary. I carefully wrapped them in their waxed canvas roll, my hands remarkably steady despite the massive surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. Next came my personal, leather-bound formulation journals, 3 thick books completely crammed with my frantic handwriting, containing every modified hydration ratio, supply chain substitution, and spice profile I had ever conceived. The daytime shift manager attempted to confiscate them right off the counter, loudly claiming they were proprietary company property. I had to aggressively point out the dated copyright notices I had meticulously written on the inside covers, legally proving they were my intellectual property, before he finally backed down, scowling. Zipping my heavy duffel bag shut, I took one last, lingering look at the massive industrial ovens I had kept running through sheer willpower, before being marched out through the rusted service elevator and pushed out into the glaring morning sun. The drive home was eerily quiet. My phone remained heavy and silent on the passenger seat until I pulled into our apartment complex. When I unlocked the front door, Derek was already there, having rushed back from his architectural firm after receiving my brief, panicked text message from the parking lot. He didn't ask for a chronological breakdown of the disaster. He just walked across the living room and wrapped his arms around my trembling shoulders, anchoring me to the present reality. "We are going to be absolutely fine," Derek murmured into my hair, his voice radiating a calm, unshakable certainty. "You are finally free from that toxic nightmare. We have savings, and you have your sanity back." Unfortunately, the rest of my family did not share his supportive, pragmatic perspective. Word travelled remarkably fast in our culinary circles, and within 2 hours, my phone was ringing frantically on the coffee table. It was a joint audio call from Maggie and Connor. I sat on the edge of the sofa, bracing myself as I swiped to answer. "Tell me it isn't true, Cass," my mother's voice crackled through the speaker, thick with heavy disbelief and a rapidly rising anger. "Connor heard from a wholesale vendor that you were escorted out of your building by security this morning, terminated for corporate espionage." "It wasn't espionage, Mum," I sighed, rubbing my exhausted eyes. "I was privately consulting for another brand on the weekends to make ends meet because my company completely refused to compensate me for doing the work of 5 people. Someone took a photograph of me receiving a physical product sample at a diner." Connor scoffed loudly into the receiver, the sound sharp and biting. "So you threw everything away? You actively jeopardized our family's foundational techniques for a part-time weekend gig, and now you have absolutely nothing to show for it. You let them use our grandmother's heritage to build their empire, and the exact second they found a convenient reason, they discarded you like trash. It's exactly what we warned you about from the beginning." Their accusations stung far worse than the HR manager's cold termination script. They didn't see the crushing physical burnout or the relentless mental pressure I had endured to keep that job. They only saw a bruised family legacy. The tense call ended in a bitter, unresolved stalemate, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence hanging in the living room. But I refused to let their profound disappointment paralyze me. Wiping away a frustrated tear, I picked up my phone again and dialed the direct cellular number I had saved for Victoria Reyes. She answered on the second ring, her tone sharp and intensely professional. Taking a deep breath, I laid out the exact events of the morning, explaining how our brief handover had been documented and weaponized. There was a brief, tense pause on the line, followed by a surprisingly warm, rumbling laugh. "Cassidy, I am incredibly sorry they put you through that humiliating public spectacle," Victoria said smoothly. "But quite frankly, they just did me a massive favor. I was currently drafting a formal proposal to steal you away permanently. Since you no longer have a restrictive non-compete clause holding you hostage, I want you at Fresh and Forge full-time. We urgently need a director of culinary innovation, and the position is yours. Name your salary." The transition was dizzyingly fast. Just 72 hours after being marched out of a building like a common criminal, I found myself walking through the soaring, glass-walled lobby of Fresh and Forge's global headquarters. The energy here was bright and electric, completely devoid of the cynical, penny-pinching dread that had haunted my previous daily routine. Victoria personally greeted me at the polished security desk and guided me up to the expansive 8th floor. "I want to introduce you to your new right-hand man," she said, proudly pushing open the double doors of a massive, sun-drenched research kitchen that completely overlooked the bustling city skyline. Standing by a pristine marble prep station was Jordan Ellis, a tall, wildly energetic man with white flour dusting his dark apron and a digital clipboard in his hand. "You must be the legendary Cassidy," Jordan beamed, enthusiastically extending a hand. "I'm the head of sourcing. We've been analyzing your structural feedback on those plant-based proteins, and frankly, you saved us from a disastrous multi-million-dollar production run. The entire team is absolutely thrilled you are finally here in person." Looking around the vibrant room, I saw 4 other dedicated prep cooks smiling warmly in my direction. The modern equipment was top tier, the research budget was fully funded, and the professional respect was palpable. I unzipped my duffel bag, unpacked my Japanese steel knives, and carefully arranged them on my immaculate new station. As I tied a crisp, perfectly white apron around my waist, a profound wave of relief washed over my chest. The suffocating, heavy weight of the past 3 years was finally gone, yet a small, quiet knot of performance anxiety still lingered deep in my stomach, whispering softly about the immense, brand-new expectations that now rested entirely on my shoulders. By Wednesday, the first cracks started to show. The immediate fallout of my abrupt departure cascaded through my former employer's operations much faster than I had anticipated. The delicate balance of their daily food production was entirely dependent on my constant micro-adjustments. Without me physically there to monitor fluctuating moisture levels or recalibrate commercial ovens for shifts in humidity, their signature items began to fail spectacularly. The wildly popular rustic sourdough bread was suddenly coming out of the massive rotating ovens, flat, dense, and unappetizing. The artisanal dipping sauces, relying on a temperature-sensitive emulsification technique I had refined, began separating into unappealing layers of oil and thick sediment. The reaction from the paying public was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, online review platforms were flooded with scathing customer complaints detailing drastic drops in food quality. The operational disaster didn't stop at angry lunch crowds. The catering division suffered a massive blow when 3 distinct corporate clients simultaneously cancelled their lucrative quarterly contracts after receiving dismal breakfast platters. The financial bleed was rapid, undeniable, and entirely of their own making. It didn't take long for their internal panic to breach my heavily guarded personal boundaries. My cell phone vibrated violently against my new prep station shortly before noon. The caller ID boldly flashed a familiar corporate headquarters number. When I deliberately let it go to voicemail, another call immediately followed. This time, I picked it up. It was Victor Hale. Gone was the polished, arrogant sneer he wore like armor during the boardroom firing. His voice was breathless, highly frantic, and laced with naked desperation. "Cassidy, we have an absolutely catastrophic situation unfolding on the main production floor," Victor stammered loudly. "The central commissary cannot stabilize the viscosity of the spiced glaze, and the bakery division just scrapped 400 pounds of ruined dough. We desperately need you to come in and troubleshoot, immediately." I stared down at the pristine stainless steel of my current workspace. "Victor, as you made abundantly clear on Monday morning, I am no longer an employee. I do not have security clearance to even enter the lobby." He audibly choked on his own massive pride. "We will draw up a temporary, highly compensated emergency consulting contract right now. Just tell us the exact hydration modifications you were using." Before I could respond, the line clicked, adding Carla Mendoza, the HR manager, to the frantic call. "Cassidy, please listen to us," Carla pleaded urgently. her previously icy tone trembling with stress. "The board of directors is fiercely demanding immediate answers. We desperately need those formulation journals you took." "Those leather journals contain my legally copyrighted intellectual property, Carla," I replied firmly, completely devoid of lingering sympathy. "You terminated me for allegedly violating my employment contract and gave me exactly 5 minutes to vacate. I highly suggest you rely on the skeleton crew you deemed sufficient to replace me." I decisively ended the call and promptly blocked both of their numbers. The pathetic corporate begging was relatively easy to dismiss, but the ensuing family drama proved far more emotionally taxing. Later that afternoon, my older brother Connor called. His voice radiated a harsh, wildly accusatory energy. "Have you actively checked the local culinary blogs today, Cass?" Connor demanded sharply. "Your former company is getting absolutely crucified online. People are openly stating the menu is inedible garbage." "I am well aware of the situation, Connor." I sighed deeply. "That is what happens when an organization fires the only dedicated person actively managing their quality control." "Do you seriously not understand how this massive failure reflects on our family?" he snapped angrily. "Everyone in the local restaurant scene knows you built that commercial menu using Nana's foundational techniques. Now those adaptations are failing publicly, and it is dragging our family's culinary reputation through the mud. You need to call them back and fix the broken recipes. Do not let their incompetence ruin our long-standing heritage." I tightly gripped the edge of the counter. "I will absolutely not go crawling back to a toxic environment that actively exploited my labor just to soothe your deeply misplaced vanity, Connor. The fact that the recipes are failing without my supervision actually proves my personal worth, not our late grandmother's incompetence. If you and Mum care so passionately about the public perception of the chain that fired me, you can march down there and fix the ruined dough yourselves." I aggressively hung up the phone. Shaking off the heavy negativity, I turned my full attention back to the sun-drenched research kitchen of Fresh and Forge. This bright space was my sanctuary now. I calmly walked over to the central prep island, where Jordan Ellis was carefully arranging a vibrant assortment of organic root vegetables. "Is everything all right over there?" Jordan asked kindly, noting my lingering tight expression. "Everything is perfectly fine," I exhaled smoothly, tying my crisp white apron a little tighter. "Let's put the past behind us and focus entirely on the autumn menu rollout." We spent the next 5 hours completely immersed in the pure joy of culinary creation. There were no restrictive budget spreadsheets, aggressively demanding we substitute premium ingredients with cheap market alternatives. Together with the dedicated team of prep cooks, Jordan and I began systematically developing an entirely new, structurally robust menu. We fearlessly experimented with highly complex flavor profiles, utilizing a slow-simmered smoky paprika reduction over perfectly roasted fennel. As the evening sun cast golden shadows across the pristine marble counters, I tasted a final spoonful of our newly stabilized seasonal broth, feeling nothing but profound peace. The Zoom meeting with Richard Langley was the last time I spoke to anyone from my old company. Unlike the frantic, emotionally unhinged phone calls I had previously received from middle management, this digital sit-down was formally requested via my personal lawyer. Richard Langley was the chairman of the board, a notoriously ruthless corporate shark who had built his vast wealth by aggressively acquiring struggling restaurant chains and gutting them for maximum profit. When his face appeared on my laptop screen, he was seated in a shadowy, wood-paneled office, exuding a carefully calculated aura of complete control. He did not bother with pleasantries or fake apologies. "Let us bypass the dramatic theatrics, Cassidy," Richard began, his voice a smooth, icy baritone that immediately set my teeth on edge. "The current executive team severely miscalculated your operational value. The resulting public relations disaster is unacceptable. I am prepared to offer you a highly lucrative independent contractor agreement. You will not have to report to the corporate office. You will simply audit the failing production lines remotely and provide the necessary corrections to stabilize the menu." I leaned forward in my dining room chair, staring directly into the webcam lens. The sheer arrogance of the man was breathtaking. He genuinely believed that a large enough check could magically erase years of profound disrespect and blatant exploitation. My terms for even considering an external audit are non-negotiable, Richard, I stated clearly, keeping my vocal tone completely devoid of any emotion. First, I require a massive, publicly distributed press release from the board formally acknowledging my wrongful termination and completely retracting the absurd allegations of corporate espionage. Second, a lump sum compensation package equivalent to 3 years of my previous executive salary, covering unpaid overtime and emotional distress. Finally, a legally binding contract stating I retain absolute, uncontested intellectual property rights to every single formulation adjustment I ever made during my tenure. Richard's confident demeanor visibly cracked, his eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. That is utterly preposterous. The board will never issue a public apology, nor will we surrender proprietary ownership of the menu architecture to an individual. Then we have absolutely nothing further to discuss, I replied, a cool wave of genuine indifference washing over my mind. I highly recommend you instruct your legal team to stop contacting me. Enjoy managing the fallout. I clicked the red button, instantly terminating the connection and permanently severing my professional ties to that toxic empire. Unfortunately, cutting the poisonous roots of my blood relatives proved to be a significantly more traumatic endeavor. That exact same Sunday evening, while Derek was out picking up groceries, a sharp, aggressive pounding echoed on my front door. I unlocked the deadbolt to find my mother, Maggie, and my older brother, Connor, standing in the dimly lit hallway. Their faces were twisted into identical masks of furious, self-righteous indignation. Before I could even attempt to block the entrance, they pushed past me, aggressively storming directly into the center of my living room. We heard through the local industry grapevine that Richard Langley personally offered you a massive contract to fix the restaurant chain, and you flatly rejected it, Maggie hissed, her hands trembling as she clutched her expensive leather purse against her chest. Are you entirely out of your mind, Cass? You are deliberately allowing our ancestors' proud culinary legacy to rot in the hands of incompetent fools out of sheer, petty spite. Connor stepped forward, his massive frame deliberately imposing, towering over me. You owe it to this family's name to step back in there and repair the structural damage you caused by getting yourself fired. You do not have the right to let Nana's foundational techniques become a massive public joke. The absolute absurdity of their combined delusion finally shattered the last remaining fragments of my familial patience. A hot, blinding anger, years in the making, surged forcefully through my veins. "Get out," I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, terrifyingly steady whisper. Both of them physically recoiled, genuinely shocked by the sheer force radiating from my command. "You do not care about me," I continued, stepping firmly toward them, forcing Connor to take a hasty step backward toward the doorway. "You never once cared about the grueling 18-hour shifts, the severe physical burnout, or the massive panic attacks I endured, trying to keep that terrible company afloat. You only care about the perceived prestige of a modified soup recipe. You are actively demanding that I submit to a group of abusive corporate executives who treated me like absolute garbage, simply to protect your fragile, inherited ego." Maggie opened her mouth to protest, her eyes wide with defensive shock, but I immediately raised a hand, silencing her. "I am completely done carrying the heavy, suffocating burden of this family's legacy," I finalized, holding the heavy wooden front door wide open. "I have built my own successful career, and I am finally respected for my own brilliant mind. I will not tolerate this toxic manipulation in my home, ever again. Do not call me, and absolutely do not show up here uninvited." The heavy silence that followed was deafening. Defeated and entirely speechless, they quietly shuffled out into the cold hallway. I slammed the door shut, locking the deadbolt with a resounding, satisfying click. I slid down onto the hardwood floor and wept, releasing decades of heavy familial guilt until my chest felt miraculously light. The following morning at Fresh and Forge, the vibrant atmosphere of the sunlit research kitchen felt even more welcoming than usual. As I meticulously organized my prep station, Victoria Reyes casually strolled in, carrying 2 steaming cups of artisan coffee. She handed one to me, her sharp eyes studying my noticeably relaxed posture. "Industry whispers travel exceptionally fast, Cassidy," Victoria noted softly, leaning against the cool marble counter. "I heard you officially told the old board to go to hell yesterday." I took a slow, comforting sip of the rich, dark roast. I established my ultimate boundaries, and I enforced them without hesitation. Victoria smiled, a bright, genuine expression of profound professional admiration. "You guarded your own brilliant worth. That is precisely the kind of fierce, unshakable strength we need leading this division. I am incredibly proud to have you standing on our side of the kitchen." Looking around the pristine, brilliantly illuminated workspace, surrounded by a supportive team and a visionary leader who genuinely valued my expertise, I finally took a deep, untethered breath. I was exactly where I belonged. The consequences came faster than anyone expected. The financial hemorrhaging at my former employer did not stop at a few disgruntled lunch crowds or minor catering cancellations. It escalated into a full-blown, catastrophic corporate collapse within an incredibly short matter of weeks. Without the intricate, highly specialized operational architecture I had painstakingly maintained, the entire supply chain completely buckled under the immense pressure of a massive, unyielding daily demand. Huge, highly lucrative, multi-year contracts with prominent regional hospital networks and sprawling university campuses were instantly severed due to continuous, severe breaches in basic quality control and massive logistical failures. Their publicly traded stock plummeted to a historical, terrifying low, triggering an immediate, ruthless, and highly panicked response from the major institutional shareholders. The internal bloodbath was swift, completely merciless, and heavily documented by the prominent national industry trade publications. Victor Hale, the perpetually smug director who had orchestrated my humiliating termination, was the very first casualty. According to the detailed reports published in the leading financial journals, the enraged board of directors demanded an immediate sacrificial lamb for the unprecedented operational disaster. Victor was unceremoniously fired during a heavily monitored Tuesday morning executive conference call, his lucrative stock options abruptly and entirely voided due to a newly activated gross negligence clause. Carla Mendoza, the icy human resources manager who had coldly handed me my final envelope, was forcefully terminated precisely 48 hours later. They were both publicly escorted out of the sprawling corporate headquarters by the exact same stern, broad-shouldered security contractors they had so eagerly weaponized against me just a few weeks prior. The poetic justice was not lost on the local culinary community. Even Richard Langley, the notoriously ruthless chairman of the board, who had arrogantly attempted to buy my silence, could not survive the intense, unyielding financial firestorm he had helped ignite. The major private equity investors, absolutely furious over the unprecedented loss of market valuation, completely lost faith in his outdated executive leadership. A highly secretive, emergency midnight board meeting was rapidly convened, resulting in a unanimous, highly publicized vote of absolutely no confidence. Richard was brutally stripped of his prestigious chairman title, forcefully removed from all active decision-making committees, and permanently forced into early, highly disgraced retirement. The toxic empire they had built on exploitation, relentless intimidation, and stolen intellectual labor was rapidly crumbling into a pile of worthless ash, completely unable to sustain its own massive weight without the solid foundation I had quietly provided. The severe collateral damage eventually radiated outward, forcefully striking my fiercely proud, inherently stubborn blood relatives. My older brother, Connor, had spent the last 2 years aggressively leveraging the immense regional prestige of our late grandmother's culinary legacy to secure massive financial backing for his own ambitious, independent premium restaurant venture. He had already signed a massive commercial lease in the trendy downtown arts district. However, now that the specific foundational techniques associated with our family name were being publicly eviscerated by prominent national food critics as cheap and inherently flawed, his wealthy private investors violently pulled their crucial funding. Connor's highly anticipated grand opening was abruptly and indefinitely suspended. His arrogant, wildly misplaced vanity had ultimately cost him the exact thing he valued above all else: his professional reputation and his future financial independence. My mother, Maggie, was violently forced to confront the harsh, undeniable reality of her profound misjudgment regarding my immense professional worth. For a brief, highly stressful period, a steady stream of thick, heavily handwritten letters arrived in my secure apartment mailbox, filled with desperate, tear-stained pleas for immediate familial reconciliation and urgent, frantic requests for me to personally intervene in Connor's failing business negotiations. I never even bothered to open a single envelope to read her elaborate justifications. I simply bought a bright red ink stamp, forcefully marked every single piece of correspondence returned to sender, and dropped them right back into the outgoing postal system. I had definitively severed those heavy, toxic chains, and I absolutely refused to sacrifice my hard-won peace to rescue people who had actively demanded my absolute professional destruction. I channeled every single ounce of my intense, newly liberated energy directly into my highly respected role as the Director of Culinary Innovation at Fresh and Forge. The sprawling, sunlit research kitchen became my absolute sanctuary, a vibrant, highly collaborative space where genuine talent was actively nurtured instead of ruthlessly suppressed. Working closely alongside Victoria Reyes was a profound daily masterclass in highly effective, profoundly empathetic executive leadership. She did not merely issue aggressive, impossible demands. She asked complex, challenging questions, eagerly listened to the structural feedback of the junior prep cooks, and generously allocated the necessary financial resources to guarantee absolute, uncompromising quality across the entire nationwide supply chain. Instead of frantically patching failing, outdated recipes with cheap commercial substitutions, I was finally allowed to build an entirely new, structurally robust menu from the ground up. I spent my days happily surrounded by massive wooden crates of vibrant, locally sourced organic produce, carefully calibrating the precise moisture retention levels of a revolutionary, plant-based heritage grain bowl. I was actively mentoring a brilliant, highly dedicated team of young developers, freely sharing the intricate mathematical formulas of flavor scaling without any paralyzing fear of corporate theft. Watching my dedicated staff laugh freely as we tasted a perfectly balanced, vibrant winter citrus reduction, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of profound professional fulfillment. The heavy, dark storm of my past had finally dissipated, leaving behind a beautifully clear, incredibly bright, and limitlessly expansive horizon. 6 months later, I stood in our new test kitchen, presenting the season's menu. The expansive, beautifully light-filled room was wrapped in a highly respectful, attentive silence as the entire senior executive board of Fresh and Forge watched my final culinary demonstration. I carefully plated the absolute centerpiece of our highly anticipated spring rollout, an incredibly delicate, structurally perfect plant-based sweet pea agnolotti, resting elegantly in a vibrant Maya lemon and white truffle emulsion. I stepped back, wiping the edges of the pristine white ceramic plate with a crisp towel, and gestured for the executives to begin the tasting. As the quiet clinking of silver forks against porcelain filled the room, I glanced over at Jordan Ellis. My incredibly talented head of sourcing gave me a brilliant, confident wink. He had spent the last 3 weeks relentlessly tracking down the absolute best organic truffle suppliers in the Pacific Northwest, just to make this specific dish a scalable reality. When the board members finally looked up, their expressions were a mixture of profound, absolute delight and genuine astonishment. Victoria Reyes, sitting at the absolute head of the massive tasting table, slowly wiped her mouth with a linen napkin and stood up, a massive, incredibly proud smile illuminating her face. Cassidy, this is not just a seasonal menu. This is a massive paradigm shift for the entire fast casual industry, Victoria announced clearly, her voice echoing perfectly in the large, modern space. Your brilliant vision has completely redefined our brand identity. Therefore, it is my absolute distinct honor to officially announce to the board that, effective immediately, you are hereby promoted to the position of Vice President of Global Culinary Development. The room erupted into genuine, thunderous applause. My dedicated team of 20 prep cooks and junior developers, standing attentively by the gleaming stainless steel ovens, cheered the loudest. Looking around at their genuinely happy faces, a profound, overwhelming wave of pure gratitude completely washed over my entire soul. The stark, almost unbelievable contrast between my current vibrant reality and my dark, suffocating past was brought into incredibly sharp focus just a few days prior. While sitting on our comfortable living room couch, my husband Derek had quietly handed me his tablet, displaying a freshly published article from a prominent national financial newspaper. My former employer, the once massive corporate titan that had arrogantly believed they could infinitely exploit my labor, had officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy restructuring. The extensive, highly detailed journalistic report outlined a devastating, irreversible timeline of complete operational failure. Following the massive executive purge that had ousted their leadership team, the desperately understaffed central commissaries could not stabilize the rapidly degrading food quality. Without the necessary technical knowledge, their massive supply chain completely collapsed. Now, their massive, expensive downtown flagship locations were entirely boarded up, displaying sad, peeling for-lease signs in the dusty windows. All of their remaining physical assets were actively being liquidated at public auction just to pay off furious creditors. It was a deeply sobering, surreal feeling to witness a former culinary empire completely dissolve into absolute nothingness, simply because they stubbornly chose to value blind cost-cutting spreadsheets over the actual human beings keeping their foundational architecture intact. I spent a massive amount of time reflecting deeply on my specific role within that spectacular disaster. For years, I had foolishly worn my severe physical burnout like a twisted badge of honor. I had actively operated under the massive, dangerous delusion that being the absolute sole bottleneck for every single recipe made me incredibly valuable. I falsely believed that hoarding all the operational knowledge securely inside my own head provided me with ultimate job security. I was horribly, fundamentally wrong. That mindset was a suffocating prison of my own making, eagerly facilitated by a highly predatory management structure. Real, unshakable professional security does not come from making yourself completely irreplaceable on the daily production line. It comes from empowering others. At Fresh and Forge, my primary daily objective is no longer just cooking, it is actively teaching. Jordan and my entire 20-person development team know exactly how to execute every single complex formulation I create. If I decide to take a spontaneous, completely disconnected 2-week vacation to Europe with Derek tomorrow morning, the entire nationwide supply chain will continue to function flawlessly without me. True, profound leadership is purposefully building a highly resilient system that absolutely does not require your constant, micromanaging presence to survive. That profound realization regarding the true nature of loyalty underwent an even more brutal, heartbreaking transformation in my personal life. Society constantly conditions us from birth to blindly believe that biological blood ties represent an unbreakable, universally sacred bond. My mother and my older brother definitively proved that a shared genetic connection absolutely does not automatically guarantee unconditional love or mutual respect. They viewed my immense culinary talent purely as a highly convenient, easily exploitable tool to maintain their own fabricated, entirely self-serving family legacy. Walking away from Maggie and Connor, actively choosing to ignore the massive weight of their historical expectations, was undeniably the most painful, terrifying decision of my entire adult life. However, it was also the most fundamentally necessary step toward my own personal salvation. My actual, genuine family is Derek. He is the man who patiently sat on the cold kitchen floor with me during my darkest, most terrifying panic attacks, constantly reminding me of my inherent, unshakable worth when I had completely forgotten it myself. True family consists exclusively of the specific people who actively protect your mental peace, who fiercely defend your personal boundaries against all intruders, and who loudly applaud your ultimate happiness even when it offers absolutely zero direct benefit to them. I have finally stopped trying to carefully manage multiple kitchens for people who actively refuse to respect my fire. Now, I simply cook for those who truly appreciate the feast. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this entire, incredibly wild, emotionally exhausting journey. I know a lot of you out there might be dealing with your own toxic environments right now. Before you scroll away, please drop a comment down below and share your own personal story. Have you ever had to walk away from a terrible job or cut ties with toxic family members to protect your peace? Let's talk about it in the comments section.